in a world which is increasingly dominated by economic priorities, FES tries to bring in a perspective of social justice and the importance of ecological justice into the whole narrative of development and progress. We initially began as a very grand idea of revegetating India's so-called wastelands. Basically, when we tried working with cooperatives and on common resources like land and water, what we realized was that we were mistaking cooperatives for cooperation. So we moved away from the format of cooperatives into a larger structures where cooperation was intrinsically by very design a part of it, like panchayats. We began working with land as a resource system, and we realized in several parts like in Rajasthan and in Orissa, where the rules and regulations that people evolved for land resources were being automatically extended to water, and in fact in very complex adaptive systems. That gave us the opening and the confidence that we could actually address. And the other important reason is commons need commons, in the sense that if the village is managing a pasture well, if at all it gets reinforced with an equally good water commons or a forest common or as a temple commons, then the chances of each one of them surviving are much better. The Water Commons project came as a boon, essentially as an issue which concerns the ecological, social and the economic points of view. Basically, looking at issues concerning natural resources requires a systems thinking of an interdisciplinary thinking, and it is between the different facets, the fine exchanges that happen between these three systems that will give a whole new range of options to work, which are very, very friendly for the poor. In the dominant worldview, there are two big developments or challenges that one sees. One is an unnecessary externalization of nature and natural resources in the discourse on development. Again, developmental thinking believe that rural people cannot manage shared resources, as a result of which more and more decision making gets centralized at the state level or gets privatized to either individual hands or corporation. We are placing this community agenda in between these two extremes, which are somewhat polarized. The levels of attention are three levels. At the primary village level, there is a lot of marginalization of people who depend most on it by rules, programs, a variety of or the dominant politics within the village, which tend to externalize or tend to exclude the people who are most dependent. And unfortunately, the kind of a land use that you follow also determines the amount of water available as a larger commons. So the more landed people tend to use water as a private resource, that means that much of less water available for livestock or for the poor people as a common resource. So one would be very clearly working at the village level to develop rules and regulations or to help people question whether the resources are being shared equally, if not equitably. The second level of strategy is also at a farmer level, at a slightly blown up ratio, like something like a landscape where again appropriation happens between villages. So our effort would be to build up this meso level apparatus like platforms, dialogues, wherein again these resources are commonized. Otherwise, most of landscape level arrangements see that some people benefit at the expense of the people who are very, very dependent on it as a critical resource. The third level of strategy is at a much larger level, where we want to engage with the decision makers primarily and the larger civil society in influencing their mindset, in influencing their behaviors of water use, as well as putting in rules and regulations and programs which support a more equitable availability of water for all people and all forms of life in a given area, making good use of science, making good use of big data available, so that people are more informed about the decisions that they are taking. There's already been discussion. The 12th plan did talk about the need for a groundwater regulatory bill. These are all responses to a particular context. Like the way we worked on land related commons with the governments, we also extend to take the same principles at least with 2-3 governments, either as a program or as a policy or as executive orders, so that there is a critical mass which gets built around and critical examples which get built around. In terms of behavior, we are partnering with some of the leading research institutes across the world in order to try and see whether experimental games can influence behavioral changes. Unfortunately, groundwater being somewhat fugitive and underground and invisible, it always remained in the private domain. Now, the first steps would be to commonize this groundwater by bringing it into the day-to-day debates of whether this is indeed a private property. We already see hope for people talking about, is it fair, is it not fair. This would be the beginnings of discussion of behavioral change, long-term change, sustainable use.